I'm always nervous when it comes to Christian films or faith films. Most of the time they tend to fall into one of two separate categories. The first consisting of films which aim to be true to the Christian faith, yet feel the need to water it down to a simplistic message for mainstream audiences. Then there are the films which completely miss the mark as far as the Christian message. Although they frequently make sizable monetary profits given their budget, these films are seldom mainstream successes. They tend to be critical misfires and fail to resonate with secular audiences. As far as I can tell, this often boils down to a conflict regarding the film's vision. For instance, you could have a solid script by an actual Christian screenwriter, yet your director for hire has absolutely no religious affiliations and simply treats the material as a means to a paycheck. The bottom line is this: if you're making a film with a Christian message, you can't expect everybody working on it to be Christian. Now, this year's Mary Magdalene is a different beast entirely. It's more in line with films like Aronofsky's Noah and Scorsese's Last Temptation. In other words, a completely revisionist take on biblical events. Unfortunately, this one holds its cards really close to its chest. It markets itself as a faith movie, and the film's trajectory suggests exactly that. Yet by the time the film's credits roll, it's clear that its agenda is far from biblical. Now at the helm we have filmmaker Garth Davis, who brought us last year's solid Oscar contender, Lion. Now it's clear by the close quarters approach to cinematography and minimalist art direction that they're going for a rather down-to-earth production. This is no Cecil B. DeMille. Although perhaps due to budgetary constraints, the stripped-back approach does complement the more intimate aspects of the film. Sometimes it was hard to see the purpose in certain compositions or editing choices, other than maybe for creating an artsy aesthetic or for cutting corners. For the most part though, the film is effective on a technical level. Generally speaking, the central performances are pretty good. Rooney Mara as Mary is an especially strong lead. Her role is a solid platform for her strengths, showcasing a nuanced and naturalistic performance which never skips a beat. The frequently excellent Joaquin Phoenix is this film's no-frills Jesus. His portrayal effectively showcases morsels of the actor's extensive skill set among the myriad of screen Jesuses, though it's not revolutionary. But neither is an exercise in tasteless parody. Let's face it, as a Christian, I'll never be fully satisfied with an on-screen Jesus. This one is decent, at least from a performance standpoint. Now, when released, the film could go one of at least two different ways. On the one hand, it could be like one of those indies that no one hears about and completely fails to make a splash. Conversely, it could ride the controversy train all the way to the bank. Now I say controversy, yet I feel as though most people wouldn't agree with that assessment. You see, the film presents itself in such a matter-of-fact fashion that it seems to suggest that the matter should be treated as fact, when in fact the matter is simply a theory, yet it's essentially pure fabrication. That was a mouthful. What frustrated me most, however, was the film's ability to wrap itself in the guise of biblical storytelling, as if to suggest that this is what Christians do believe. Now, as the film was starting out, I'll admit I was impressed. It presents Jesus as a divisive figure who pushed against the religious hypocrisy and dominant culture of his time. Yet at the same time, there were certain obvious omissions from the biblical text which I found quite odd. In all fairness to the film though, it's never clearly intended as a straight biblical adaptation. Mary Magdalene, for instance, is not really fleshed out in the biblical sources, so the screenwriters have to fill in a lot of the gaps. However, as the changes to scripture became more and more apparent, it was very clear to me that these were intentional. I'm surprised I didn't figure it out sooner. All of the pieces were there. The male-dominated culture, the purposeful changes to scripture, the defiant female protagonist. This was clearly a propaganda piece, a feminist propaganda piece. Now, don't get me wrong, I have no problem with a film addressing the inequalities faced by women in a different historical and cultural context. No, that's not what bothered me. What bothered me was the fact that they felt the need to rewrite the Christian gospel in order to achieve their goal. According to the film's closing sequence, and I don't think I'm spoiling the film by saying this, but it's heavily implied that the gospel that we now have is the result of misogynistic pride, and it was only one woman who truly understood the teachings of Jesus. This is then accentuated by the half-baked conclusions which the film makes of everything we've just seen. There are some helpful messages to be gleaned from this film, but along with their approach to writing Jesus, it's all very hit and miss. Sometimes when approaching the messianic figure's dialogue, they directly paraphrase quotes of his from the Bible. Yet at the moment they attempt to come up with something new for him to say, it simply comes across as a jarring mix between vague sentimentality and
marijuana-influenced philosophy.
Jesus isn't really presented as the Son of God in this film, and even though the narrative essentially hinges on him, I don't feel like the filmmakers knew what significance to give him. I guess if you attempt to reshape scripture from a secular humanist perspective, it's hard to know what to make of him. Although I could go on and on about this film's characterization of Jesus, or even the disciples Peter or Judas, the film is, after all, not named after any of them. Mary Magdalene herself, though, is also a bit of a mixed bag. I was thoroughly engaged by a truly heartbreaking opening act in which Mary becomes the victim of culturally sanctioned abuse. This, however, is followed by a lot of meandering, punctuated by the odd moment in which the character actually gets to do something interesting again. To be honest, the film made me less interested in her story than that of Jesus. Even though she had some affecting and even powerful moments, her story wasn't evenly handled. Which is why the conclusions she reaches in the final scene just feel unearned and tacked on. What can I say to sum up my feelings for this film? Well, that's 1 part fascinating to 2 parts confusing and 4 equal parts disappointing and deceptive, which all equates to frustrating. By its closing statement, the film wears its heart on its sleeve, but I'm not confident that it has its heart in the right place. This is a very topical film, so there's every chance that it could take off. I, for one, am not going to endorse it. However, I would recommend for Christians to go and see it to be part of the conversation. As always, you've been lovely. Till next time, motion peeps.